guide your journey into Cabernet Sauvignon magnificence. Welcome to the Pick and Pay Wine and Food Festival, the last one of 2022, and it's happening at the Wanderers. It's been a bit of a dodgy weekend weather-wise, but that has not stopped the crowds. This place has been absolutely packed with people enjoying fabulous wine, eating great food, enjoying the live music, and just having a great deal of fun being out together as a group and enjoying it. And that's exactly what I'm doing over the course of this weekend. It's not all I'm doing this weekend though. I'm also looking back at some really cool experiences I've had wine-wise. A little later on, one of those is Steenberg. We're trying out the 5 Lives, a red blend with loads of Merlot out of Steenberg that I got to sample and have a taste of. What I also got to do though was to try out some Neil Ellis wine with Neil himself. He's an industry icon. He's made over the years some of the finest wines that Stellenbosch can lay claim to. So I had sat down with him at the Houghton Hotel and the Séjour restaurant. He pulled out some older years and I discovered just what makes aged Cabernet Sauvignon from Stellenbosch so absolutely marvelous. If it looks like I'm about to head off on an Arctic expedition, then there are 2 reasons for it. I've got goosebumps because it's a bitterly cold winter's day in Johannesburg and the temperature is further reduced by being inside the cellar at Séjour, a wonderful cellar which I have on a regular basis been stopped from surreptitiously removing wine from. But I've also got goosebumps because I'm in the presence of wine royalty. Neil Ellis is not just a brand, there actually is a Neil Ellis behind the Neil Ellis, and the Neil Ellis in question is with me today. Lovely to see you, Neil.
Thanks, Dan.
Part of one of the great Stellenbosch wine legacies, and one that goes back a little way. Tell us a little bit about the Neil Ellis wine journey.
Well, Dan, I don't come from a family owning Cape Dutch gables and slave bells. I'm a first-generation producer. I think it was really old Europe that played a major part in crystallizing my way forward. I wasn't quite sure whether winemaking was the career I would have wanted because I was very uncertain as a student, but I thought that the best thing to do is just get into a winery first to determine whether it's for you or not. But I was very lucky to get a job at the KWV, which in the early mid-70s was what one could almost term a production powerhouse. And in the production side of things, there were many great people who played a big part in my career. It was really only in my second year of work that I sort of came to the conclusion that this is really about me, or let's say I could play a small part in it going forward. But after KWV, I landed the position as winemaker at Kruit Constantia, which in the 70s was probably seen as probably the establishment for red wine. As I said, once I had experienced old Europe, one thing really stood out in my mind was that no single piece of land could ever be good for all grape varieties. And it was really with that in mind that I started pondering on, should I be able to one day do my own bit? There's no ways I can and ever wanted to own tracts of vineyard. Or for that matter of fact, even at that point in time, I couldn't afford a winery. But there was always a hollowed out tree stump or a spare tank in someone's cellar. And that sort of kick-started my venture. But I had to make up my mind with what varieties I'd like to work with, and secondly, in what area. I'd looked at areas outside of, let's call it, the traditional sites. And for reasons that I felt would make a distinctive contribution to what I had in mind. So It took me off to places like Elgin, which was still very much apple country. It took me off to the hills in Darling, which were predominantly wheatlands. The next challenge was obviously to identify the grower who understood me. But I must say, even to this day, many of them are still our suppliers. So although we've taken ownership of certain vineyards, we still have long-term supply agreements, and obviously also we forge long-term friendships. And I mean, I have a son who's really taken over the role of winemaking, and I mean, he's again with their kids, mustn't say kids, I mean, they all 40 plus, but like Dani, they have their own way of going about things. And I must say, I mean, I'm very grateful because it's all added value. This time of my life, I am more than content that my team is far more capable than I am, but that I at least could play a tiny role in stimulating their way forward. So yeah, I'm happy.
I suspect there's more than just a tiny role. There's still plenty of guidance to be given, and especially in the grape that we celebrate today. Because if I think of the Neil Ellis wine that I've drunk over the years, and there's certainly been a fair amount of it, it is Cabernet Sauvignon that immediately comes to mind in terms of some of the wine that I've particularly enjoyed. We've got 3 examples to try out. Before we jump into the vintages, what is your relationship with Cabernet Sauvignon? What makes it so special?
If I go back to the 70s when I was a student and started my career in winemaking, there was often, or let's say often, there was every year what was termed a young wine show. Now, the origin of the young wine show, if you go back in history, this is a show that was held in Observatory in Cape Town, and that was the first opportunity wine buyers from the major merchants would get to see the new crop and obviously to make their purchases. This thing developed, and in the 70s there were a few standout properties when it came to red, and one that comes to mind was Ver Genoeg. Interesting, at that time owned by the Forer family, so it was PO Box 1 Forer, and guess who was there first? But the KWV at that stage bought their entire crop of red. And obviously the big trophy at that time was the General Smuts Trophy. And that was for the overall champion. And no doubt Ver Genoeg had won this for about 5 years in a row. But they, for their day, were exceptional wines. And exceptional for a reason other than quality. These were wines that once had been through maturation, prepared for bottling, and bottled, had wonderful aging potential. But these wines always had a huge degree of finesse about them, although they were powerful. And those were the kind of wines that really I sort of remembered too from travels, tastings, and so forth, from the European counterparts. But I think the important thing was it was Cabernet that really sort of tickled my fancy. I think today we have got a wonderful selection of plant material, and obviously Cabernet being one. So there's clonal material, rootstock combinations to suit environment and soil types. So in that respect, I think we're really well set. And in my own environment, I mean, we've obviously put in a lot of work over a long period of time, decades, in identifying sites that we believe would be particularly suitable to what we have in mind. So it's what today is now obviously one of the most cherished areas is Bannock. I mean, I was also the very first one to get fruit from that area, and that was in the mid-80s. But also, I mean, I was also very fortunate to have met a fellow Hans Schroeder who had the Oder Nectar farm, and that was also, I think, for me, the departure of a wonderful understanding of that valley, the Jonkershoek Valley, which to this day forms the backbone of our Cabernet plantings and ultimately our top quality offerings. So yeah, that's where we are now.
If you've had any Start Condé wine, you'll know exactly where the region is for these grapes. And that leads us into some Cabernet Sauvignon. I was already looking forward to trying it. The fact that it's about 3 degrees outside heightens my desire for some red. And I'm fascinated to see not just what you've chosen, but why you've chosen it, because you arrived from the Cape with hundreds of bottles of wine, which is fabulous. But you've only chosen 3 of the cabs. And I know one of them is the most recent one, I think, or one of the more recent ones, the 18. We've also got a 10 and a 6. Well, let's try the first of these, 2018. Cheers, Neil, and thank you. How much of a challenge is it? Here's a wine that's still just 4 years old, so it's still very young, particularly as a Cabernet Sauvignon. But as much as you want to make wine that you can sit aside, well, we'll drink this in 10 or 15 years' time, there's also the small issue of actually having to sell wine, and you can't always wait, and people who are buying the wine aren't always buying it to set aside for the next decade. So striking that balance between something that, as we're going to see in a moment, can be drunk 16 years later, but also something that if somebody's picking it up off the shelves at Pick and Pay this week, they can have this week.
Good wine should have a basic accessibility even when young. I think we all came from a generation believing that young wine must be undrinkable when young because in time it's going to mature well. That's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. There's got to be a beauty about it right now. And if well cared for, in other words, your cellar conditions are beneficial, you'll be rewarded. So in that case, I mean, I'm more than convinced that consumers today are going to be enjoying many fine wines in 10, 15 and 20 years time. But it's your choice.
Well, I would certainly take this 2018 very happily, but I'm also very excited to go back to 2010, which was a seminal year for South Africa. World Cups, Louis Oosthuizen winning Opens, and Neil Ellis making Cabernet Sauvignon, probably the big 3 of 2010. So tell me a little bit more about this particular wine.
This is already now 12 years old, and I think just so approachable.
It's remarkably fresh for a 12-year-old wine. So 12 years down, and that's doing wonders both for my palate and for the weather outside.
Sure.
2006, I'd like to say I was just finishing off high school, but not quite. I would have been actually not too far out of university, fairly early on in my wine journey. And again, 2006 is not one of those vintages that comes up all the time when people are throwing back to the ones that stand out. But again, given time and given patience, this is clearly one that you feel has moved into a really special space.
Yeah, I think it's now, you know, if you look at the evolution and the development of wine, it moves away from what I refer to when young, just an abundance of sort of primary fruit notes. And as it develops, that is now showing just such attractive, what I call secondary characters. And they're more complex. And as it evolves in glass too, you'll find new things. And I think that's really the beauty about wine, because we could be sitting around a table as now. It's subjective and there's as many opinions as people around that table. But I mean, you know, that's really the source of its appeal. And if complemented with a good meal, you could spend a wonderful evening talking through it. But sure, you know, I think wine, to my mind, wasn't designed to be the source of talk. It's there to complement wonderful food and conversation. So I don't think it's meant to be more than that. Just unfortunately, in this day and age, people, I would imagine, and I don't blame them, find wine fascinating, and I think we, the beneficiaries of it.
I am very much amongst those who find it fascinating, and I love talking about it. And I particularly love talking about it when it's someone who has such a rich history around the topic and has made such fabulous wine. And we've got three very good examples of that. Neil, I could quite happily sit here for hours and chat. So what I'll have to do then is promise to come down to Stellenbosch, come and spend some time
You're
on the
welcome.
farm.
You must do it.
And carry on telling this wonderful story of yours. But thank you for sharing a little of it on a cold Johannesburg day.
A pleasure.
For sharing some wonderful red wine.
And cheers.
From the heart of the Houghton Hotel in Johannesburg, the story of Neil Ellis and some rather good Cabernet Sauvignon. Well, one of the greatest wine treasures South Africa has is its people, and Neil Ellis, a splendid example of that. That was some really good wine. There is a little older red floating about. If you can find it, and if you're sure that it's been looked after well, you're in for a treat, as I was with Neil at Séjour at the Houghton. A part of the joy of the Pick n Pay Wine and Food Festival is the art of comparison, trying different styles, trying different vintages, trying different areas, and in the case of the sparkling garden behind me, trying different interpretations of the world of bubbles. There's a pile of South African bubbles here, people like Pierre Jordan, Krona, that's all they make up in Tulbagh. There's also some Italian Prosecco, brands like Valdo, and there are a couple of champagnes, Piper Hazeltine here and Laurent Perrier. And what's most fun is to try them all and just see what you like about them, what's different about them, how they come together. It's not we drink one instead of the other. I like to drink them together, complement each other, and find out how they bring the best out of each other. And that is what I will be doing as part of my weekend down here at the festival. In fact, I'm going to go do some tasting in a moment, the tasting room over my shoulder. While I do that, I shall leave you at a restaurant in the heart of Sandton, where I sat down with a team from Steenberg to try out a new red blend that is showing once again that the Constantia Valley, as famous as it might be for white wines, and in particular Sauvignon and the Sauvignon Semillon blends that are now referred to as the Constantia Whites, there's also some rather good red coming out of the valley as well. If you've got a good memory and you watch the Dan Nichols show religiously, which really you should, then you'll recognise my guest who's made her way up from the wilds of Cape Town to the calm and splendour of Johannesburg to share some wine with me. Welcome back, Heather. And you've come armed with something that some people might not be expecting, because Steenberg, famed for Sauvignon Blanc, famed for your bubbles, here you are out of Constantia Valley, which we know is white wine territory, and instead you've arrived with a bottle of red.
Indeed, Dan, and it's a privilege to show it to you today. And I think that you're so right. Steenberg is most known for its Sauvignon Blancs, but definitely our terroir is what we're actually all about at Steenberg, expressing our terroir as best as we possibly can. And we've got that beautiful cool ocean breeze which comes in from the False Bay coastline, and all the other parts of our terroir make it a perfect spot for growing Bordeaux varietals. And so, as you mentioned, Sauvignon Blanc is the main one that we do and what we're most known for. We actually do it in 5 different ways to make sure that everyone's fancies are satisfied. But we also have the red Bordeaux varietals that we have in our portfolio, and we are super duper excited to launch our newly released Steenberg 5 Lives Red Blend, which we are showcasing today.
Tell me a bit about that cool breeze, because we often talk about it in the context of a white wine, and 50% of Constantia is Sauvignon Blanc. That makes sense. Cool breeze in red wine, why is that important? Why does that help the wine that you make?
Sure. So I think that when we're looking at Steenberg, where we're situated, we are close to the False Bay coastline, and that cool breeze means that we have much lower average temperatures. So on average, our hottest month being February, obviously, our average temperature is about 23 degrees. So it's much cooler. And what we've done is we've got a piece of the land which is situated near Norval Art Gallery, next to Steenberg, where our red grapes are grown. And that is actually slightly the warmest part of the farm, but still the red varietals of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon do well in that particular area.
So conditions not that dissimilar really to Bordeaux in terms of that slightly cooler area. So it's clearly helped you to produce this wine, which we're going to taste in a second. I'm quite excited. Tell me a bit about it. What's in it and why is this special for Steenberg?
Sure. So it is a beautiful, delicious, very juicy wine, and it is Merlot led, and so you'll see that coming through when you taste it. But then it's supported by the Cabernet Sauvignon, yeah, we decided to call it Five Lives. And why call it Five Lives, people ask, and it's got a beautiful story to it, and it links to the history of Steenberg and where we came from and what we're really proud of, and that is the story of Katerina Russ. She was a courageous, determined lady, pioneering and very inspiring. And she had kind of 5 chapters of her life which she went through and went through hardships, but also flourishing and wonderful moments. And we really want to pay respect to that and pay admiration to her and to the legacy that she left us in this beautiful wine that we have today.
I have to ask you this. When I first heard about the story of this woman, I was convinced this was the Steenberg marketing team that had a bit too much to drink. They'd come up with a story and they'd just gone a bit too far because it wasn't really believable. Of course, it is all true. When you first heard this story, did you raise an eyebrow and think, no, surely this can't be right?
Totally. I mean, how crazy is it? She had 5 husbands. She led this wild life in Cape Town in those days, which was, not a place for a woman to live by herself. It was most unheard of. And the fact that we are the oldest farm in South Africa and the fact that it was owned by a woman is absolutely amazing. I mean, we don't quite know how she was able to do it in those days, but she did it. And it's a story which still remains so relevant today. And that's what we are really grateful for, is that it's something that, the consumers today can really appreciate and understand and connect with.
And by extension, I'm not sure that the lives of yourself and Ilunda are quite as colourful and extraordinary, but there is a rich tradition that continues with yourself, with your cellar master, of women running Steenberg and producing wine that pays tribute to this great hero of the estate.
Totally. And the company often says that part of the tick box of what has to be achieved when you get a senior role at Steenberg is that, are you female or not? Because can you continue the legacy of Katerina? No, I'm joking. That's not really true. But it's such a privilege to be able to say that we have an executive chef who is Chef Kerry Kilpin. We have Catherine Schulze, who is our MD of the hospitality part of Steenberg. Ilunda Besson, as you mentioned, is our cellar master at Steenberg Vineyards. I'm the marketing manager, and and then we also are super privileged to now have Emma Beck join the team as the CEO of Steenberg Hospitality. She's obviously part of the Beck family who owns the land and the entities. It's a true privilege to have all these pioneering women part of Steenberg today to continue the legacy.
And a wonderful legacy this. Katerina would love it, I have no doubt. I suspect she'd quite like this wine as well. Ilunda, having the opportunity now, and I'd imagine an opportunity she's relishing, having spent so much time making bubbles, making great bubbles, now at Steenberg, being able to continue that, but also moving into new areas. And one of these is the red. As we taste it, and cheers, and thank you for the introduction. Tell me from your perspective what we're getting out of this wine.
So I think it's Merlot led with a Cabernet supporting it, and this is a true expression of Constantia in a bottle, and it expresses who we are and what makes us unique and what we do best. It's a new wine that's in our classic range, and it really is supposed to be a very quaffable, easy drinking wine that you can have kind of on a midweek dinner, with really nice juicy fruit expressions. That's just a pleasant wine to enjoy.
All right, let's see if I agree with my host today. There's almost a price, I think, that Constantia pays for being quite so good at Sauvignon Blanc and the Sauvignon Semillon blends, which are also a big part of the valley, in that the reds don't get quite so much attention. I think of Constantia Glen as a good example, with the 3 and the 5, which are both terrific, had some lovely Hut Constantias, and this is another great example. So your marketing challenge, I suppose, is keep everybody supporting the Sauvignon Blanc, but make sure that they know about this one as well.
Totally. And I think that we went through a really interesting process during COVID. Obviously all stuck at home and trying to figure out what we're going to do with not being able to sell wine locally, and it was actually a great time for us as a team to sit and think about who we are, what makes Steenberg unique, what where we sit in the market and what we are all about. And it was during that time that we actually made some big strategic decisions in our portfolio, and we cleaned up our portfolio a bit. The classic range was formed with beautiful new labels for the classic range, and we realized this Bordeaux red varietal was needed to show what Steenberg does best, what our land gives us, and what our terroir can best express.
One last question for you. My visits to Steenberg normally revolve around golf and then wine. I can't play golf for a few months at the moment, so I'll be focused on the wine. I'm going to make up with some food. When I drop in at your fabulous bistro, what am I having with this?
I just tasted the other day the gnocchi. Oh, to die for. It was delicious. And I think this would definitely be best suited for something like the pulled pork gnocchi.
Pulled pork gnocchi, I am sold. Throw in a glass of the brand new red blend from Steenberg and I am double sold. Give it a try. It is a reminder that as absolutely fabulous as the Constantia Valley is with Sauvignon Blanc and the Sauvignon Semillon blends that they are now proudly describing as the Constantia White, they make a pretty decent glass of red as well. So that then another reminder of just how good red wine is in Constantia as well. Yes, Steenberg make brilliant bubbles. Yes, their Sauvignon Blanc is a cracker, but that new Five Lives red blend, just another addition to a side of Constantia we sometimes don't give quite as much attention to, so one for you to look out for. You could also look out for, next time you're doing a bit of shopping down at Pick n Pay, for Compagnie's Drift. And I've just finished a tasting here. You might remember Ilse being on the show not that long ago, and I've shown a level of self-control that is staggering because it's a food and wine pairing. And just to get the shot, I have left the food, but I'm going to demolish it in just a second. Pairing up the food and wine, as we've been doing all weekend in the tasting room, has again just showcased some of the very best of one of South Africa's finest attributes, making great food and producing terrific wine. That's what we saw with Steenberg, that's what we saw with Neil Ellis earlier in the show as well, and that's what we'll see on the show next week when we hope you'll join us. For now though, this is Dan Really Likes Wine from the Pick n Pay Wine and Food Festival, where I'm off to do a little more research. Cheers.